Hey guys, so first of all, I hope all is well, and I'd like to welcome you all to this season's podcast. Considering how many of us are locked inside right now, bored out of our minds, I thought it would be a nice gesture to make this podcast available to our entire community and not just my patrons, because I would like to do my part to keep you all entertained and to help you take your mind off things, even if it's just for a few minutes. We're a community after all. As always, I'll be answering some questions that were submitted by my patrons, along with a few topics that I've chosen. So yeah, let's jump straight to it. So the first question regards the Undying Lands, and whether mortals that travel there, such as Gimli, Frodo and Bilbo, would become immortal and live forever amongst the elves. So there is actually a very common misconception when it comes to the Undying Lands, and it probably stems from its name. For many people think that the Undying Lands had some sort of magical aura or blessing that stopped its inhabitants from dying or growing old and preserved them. However, this is very inaccurate, for these lands were actually called the Undying Lands because of their inhabitants, all the elves, Maiar and Valar that lived there, since all of these beings were mortal, and so nobody ever died in these lands, apart from a few exceptional cases, such as Feanor's mother and father. The mortals that lived there would only linger for a while, and they would eventually grow old and pass away, and their spirits would join the rest of their race to whatever afterlife awaited them. However, while they stayed in Valinor, they would be able to enjoy its bliss, its beauty, its healing and tranquility, and these shouldn't be underestimated, for compared to Valinor, Middle-earth paled in comparison. In Frodo's case, he was allowed to travel to the Undying Lands since he was a ring bearer, and this land might have helped him to heal from all the suffering and injuries that he had sustained throughout his quest, both mentally and physically, and it would offer him a period of reflection and peace where he could appreciate his position and effect in this world while enjoying a land that was unspoiled by evil. It also appears that apart from a natural death, mortals that lived in the Undying Lands could also choose to pass on willingly, which to me seems to suggest that their stay in the Undying Lands was more focused on healing rather than enjoying its beauty, and once they felt ready, they could pass on to the afterlife of their race out of their own desire. Now the next question concerns a hero of men from the First Age called Turin, or more precisely his sword, Gurtang, and I was asked to discuss the fate of this blade after Turin's death, and why it never reappeared in the story of Arda. So after Turin slew the great dragon Glaurung, he used his sword Gurtang to take his own life, and he fell upon it, which broke the sword into several pieces, and these fragments were buried with Turin beneath a nearby landmark which would later be known as the Stone of the Hapless. Now this area was part of the land of Beleriand, a huge landmass that was devastated and sank beneath the sea after the cataclysmic and final battle of the First Age known as the War of Wrath. Though this landmark would actually survive, and it became part of an island called Tol Morwen, and so technically the blade Gurtang, or at the very least its fragments, could still be recovered in the ages to come, though such an act would have probably been frowned upon, and it would have certainly been disrespectful to the dead. I also think that most grave robbers would have avoided this artifact, considering that the history of Gurtang was marred with sorrow and tragedy, and at times this blade almost seemed to have its own evil will, which would make such an act of plundering unwise to say the least. Despite all of this, it seems that this sword still had a part to play in the history of Arda, for according to the prophecy of Dagor Dagorath, Turin would return from the dead at the end of the world, and he would use his black sword Gurtang to slay Morgoth in what was probably one of the most iconic deeds to come. Now for my next question, I was asked to clarify whether Ancalagon the Black, the greatest of the winged dragons, was more powerful than Glaurung, the first dragon. So first of all, it's quite hard to compare power levels in Arda, since we wouldn't know their full capabilities and limits. And so, just to be clear, this answer is simply my own speculation. So both of these dragons were incredible creatures and formidable in their own way. However, in terms of raw power, I would feel quite confident in saying that Ancalagon the Black was greater than Glaurung, for Glaurung was unable to fly, and the winged dragons were the ultimate creatures of Morgoth. And so, since Ancalagon was the greatest of the winged dragons, I think that this would imply that he was the greatest dragon that ever lived in terms of raw power. We don't know much about Ancalagon's wit and cunning, while in Glaurung's case, we witnessed how he manipulated the children of Turin and the power of the evil spirit that dwelled inside him, which is why I feel compelled to emphasize that Ancalagon was stronger than Glaurung only in terms of raw power, but it's certainly possible that Glaurung was more capable when it came to manipulation and cunning. It seems that Ancalagon is quite the fascinating character, since the next question also concerns this mighty dragon, and I was asked to discuss the size of Ancalagon, since after his death, he fell upon the 3 mountain peaks of Thangorodrim, and this impact destroyed them, and these were the greatest mountains of Middle-earth. Now I feel that this imagery of Ancalagon crushing the mountains makes people overestimate Ancalagon's size, for they would think that he must have been larger than these mountains to be able to crush them beneath his massive body. However, I feel that we should keep in mind that when something falls to the ground, it's not only its size or mass that decides the level of destruction, but also the force of impact. I'm sure that Ancalagon was still incredibly large and powerful, and he was certainly quite a formidable size, though since he fell from the skies, he would have smashed into the mountains with quite a force that would have been strong enough to destroy them, even if he was much smaller than they were. Anyway, I'm sorry for turning this into a physics lesson about dragons, though there is another point that I'd like to make. So during the War of Wrath, the winged dragons emerged out of the pits of Angband, which was found beneath the mountains of Thangorodrim, and it would be quite impressive, and I think slightly far-fetched, if Ancalagon managed to fit inside of these pits, assuming that he was larger than the mountain peaks. Now for today's topic, I wanted to discuss the author Tolkien, to see which character and race from the books would suit him best. I'll be using some of Tolkien's answers from his letters, for he actually discussed this topic quite a few times. So when it comes to a character, Tolkien felt that he was most similar to Faramir, though according to Tolkien, he lacked the courage that most of his characters possessed. I feel that he was probably being humble in his answer, considering this is a man that fought in the First World War, which would have most definitely required ample courage. I can also see how his personality, ideology and wisdom would fit quite well with Faramir, especially how Faramir didn't love war for its battles and glory, but rather he saw it as a way in which he could preserve and save the things that he loved, which I feel would resonate quite well with Tolkien, especially with his wartime experience. Some people also compare Tolkien to the Herb Master of Gondor, for they could both be seen as academics who loved ancient lore, though I don't think that any of these similarities were intentional. Now when it comes to a race in Middle-earth, Tolkien compared himself to the hobbits, for he loved gardens, trees, the farmland and nature, and he hated the idea of the countryside becoming mechanized or ruined by industry. They also shared the love for cooking, ornamental waistcoats and mushrooms, along with a simple sense of humor, and both Tolkien and the hobbits loved the comfort of home and family, and they didn't travel much. I also think that it's worth mentioning that after his death, Tolkien had the names of Beren and Lúthien engraved upon his grave and that of his wife respectively, though I don't think that it was because he saw himself as the character of Beren. Rather, I think that the incredible love that Beren and Lúthien shared matched the devotion and appreciation that Tolkien felt towards his wife. Anyway friends, this wraps up today's video and I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I'd like to thank my patrons for their continuous support and for making these episodes possible. I really appreciate it. If you're interested, check out our Facebook, Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, and some of our affiliate links in the video description. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to join our fellowship today. Until next time friends, take care and thanks once again for supporting this channel.